presentation about accessible PDF and how to take content the right way. I give you first a little overview about the content of the presentation. First, I give a little speech about myself and the PDFUA technical working group, and then I jump in to the content itself. So I'm just talking about the situation about PDFUA and its guidelines. I talk about a little bit related documents by the PDF Association, the Matterhorn Protocol, the tagged PDF best practice guide, and then I come to some real-world examples and how to deal with them, and what, for example, Matterhorn and tagged PDF best practice guide help you to develop, for example, software, or if you're building up documents, how it helps you to deal with real-world examples. Afterwards, I give a little development future overview. How will we be? How will we be in several years, maybe? And at the end, there's time for some questions. Okay, let's jump in. First, to my person. My name is Klaas Posselt. I'm from Germany. I work as a consultant mostly, and I'm one of two community chairs for the PDFUA technical working group, together with Matthew Hardy. About the PDFUA technical working group, we are one of 12 technical working groups at the PDF Association. You can have a little overview at the page of the PDF Association, and here inside you can find a link to the working group. So if you're interested what we do, just visit us on our page. And if you like to get in touch, for example, if you like to give some input, then just write us an email, pdfua@pdfa.org. All right, after this, we come to the situation and why we are talking about accessible PDF and how to take it the right way. We have PDF 1.7 or ISO 32K, as we call it. So that's our main base for every PDF we like to generate, for example, or build. And inside this PDF specification, which is an ISO norm for several years now, we have a chapter about tagged PDF. It's chapter 14.8. And that's the base for every accessible file. So you need some kind of tagging structure inside your PDF document to make it accessible, to have the possibility to say what is a heading, what is a picture, what is a table, for example. But the problem for us building up accessible content is that tagged PDF is not only about accessibility. It's, for example, another purpose could be content reuse. If you like, for example, to put some data in a file, in a PDF file, and you don't want to be the PDF, the place where all data dies, you want to have a possibility to get out the data, for example, as an HTML file or as a Word file, whatever, then content reuse could be a possible way for you to use tagged PDF. And that's not made, or might be not the same issue with your content, how to deal with it in relation to accessible files. For example, let's talk about alternate text for picture. That's not always need. That's not a need for content reuse. That's most about accessibility. And we have a problem too, that we have no real precise description how an accessible PDF should look like. So it's only tagged PDF, but it's not about accessibility. So we need a way to define how should a PDF look like. Boris, for example, that was a session before this one, talked about WCAG, and we have a problem there too. There are some definitions in WCAG world, and how to bring it in a PDF file. It could be some different stuff. So our solution was to build a PDF subset standard. It's PDFUA 1. UA is universal accessibility. So it's based on the PDF set. Everything inside 32K is a base for PDFUA. And the definitions for everything like tags and so on is not written in PDFUA. It's everything in the PDF spec itself. And the core clause of this ISO standard is that content shall be marked the correct way. So reading order, for example, should be the right way. And that's some kind of different to the PDF standard itself, because it's just about tags and nothing about semantic appropriate structure and so on. With this situation, we come to small problems. If you're running into producing such documents, you might find that PDFUA, as it is based on PDF, it does not cover all needs and all issues you find in accessible files, for example. And as PDF was invented and went to ISO definition, not everything was known about which might be in 10 years or later. So some things are still missing, for example, in the PDF specification now. Some things will change in PDF2. I come to this later, but not everything is clearly defined. It's not precise in all areas how to use it. And one example, for example, if you take a look inside the PDF specification about grouping tags, for example, and one example is, for example, the sect tag. So it's just written there in the PDF specification, a container for grouping related content elements. Whatever this could be, it's not written clearly defined there. The same with other things like, for example, article and so on, or art is it official tag. And with the situation, we have the problem, which tag should I use in which areas, for example, and how the correct tagging structure should look like. And to help developers or people dealing with such kind of content, the PDF Association developed two documents. One is the Matterhorn Protocol. Boris spoke about this one briefly before. And the second one is the Tag PDF Best Practice Guides. You can find both of the publications on the PDF Association websites. It's free for download. And the main intention is to help developers and document testers to use such kind of documents as a help to produce better files or the right ones. I just jump into some things about the Matterhorn protocol. As Boris said, we have several checkpoints and failure conditions, and this is a reference or checklist to validate accessible files. And we divided it into machine readable and machine checkable points and human checkable points. And to give you a little kind of overview about that, I took 3 points out of it. It's, for example, section 6. And I just jump over to the Matterhorn protocol to give you a little overview. So just jump inside the Matterhorn section for point number 6. And for example, we have document does not contain an XMP metadata stream. You can use a software to check it if there is a metadata or not. And then you can say yes or no, or give a red X or whatever you like. That's possibly machine checkable. But for example, the point number 4 here in this area, it's about DC title does not clearly identify the document. So what is the document about? If I would take, for example, the Matterhorn protocol as my example file, if I would name the title of the document my first PDF file, it wouldn't be the right way to tell users what's inside this kind of file. So that's one that's human checkable. And for the software side, most things can be checked on the machine side, and there are ways to, for example, give people possibilities to help to identify errors on the human side. But the main purpose is you have a checklist to check it. So it's one of the first points that you can use dealing with accessible content. I just skip over the 13th part. It's quite the same thing. Then we come to our next point, and that's the Tag PDF Best Practice Guide. Syntax, we call it syntax because it's not about issues. What is a heading, for example? Is this H3 or H4? So that's only about syntax in the tagging structure. And it should people help how the correct syntax should look like in a tagged PDF file, compressed into just one document. So you don't need to read the whole PDF chapter 14.8. You don't need to read the whole Matterhorn protocol. There are several advices in the document how to deal with content and how to take it the right way. And for this one, I have several examples too, and I will show you the parts in the Tag PDF Best Practice Guide and give you, with this presentation here, some kind of overview how it works in real-world PDF files. I divided this one in several things. So the first one is about tags, and my examples are empty tags and footnotes. And the second one is about attributes, and my example will be actual text. So I just jump to the next page, and here we have our first real-world example. I have a paragraph, would like to have a footnote. Then I have space, and normally many people will use just an empty paragraph to make some distance between two kinds of paragraphs. And then in the last paragraph, we have a footnote. It's there's number 1, and at the end of my page, I have my real-world footnote. So 2 examples inside. First one is here at this point, we have an empty paragraph. And the question is, should I have an empty paragraph in my tagging structure or shouldn't I? And the second one, how should a footnote look like? And if you take to take a look inside the PDF specification, for example, you will not find these issues addressed. So what I did here, I used some kind of software to extract the tagging structure here, and I will present it to you in a website, a kind of website. So tagging just went to another website, and here we have our first example. So my first paragraph is a simple paragraph. It's called P, and second one is empty, so that's not inside my tagging structure. And for the last one, I have here a footnote reference. It's tagged with a reference label. I have an LBL tag, and inside the footnote quite the same way. And if you read the PDF spec, you will not really find this addressed in the right way. So we just jump back to our tagged guide, and we have, for example, here chapter 3.5 about empty tags, and we divided it into several parts, and there are several issues with this. For example, with headings, there's a special section in the heading section about empty headlines. Sometimes you need to use them if a document is poorly designed, for example. And we, for example, speak about empty table cells, which is forbidden because you will destroy your tagging structure of the table. So we divided it in several parts, and the second one is the note tag. And as you can here, for example, see, we have a well-prepared document. You can jump inside the whole thing and just jump to the things you like to see. And in my case, I like to talk about the note example. And what we do here in the kind of document, we say you something about what is a note tag. We give you some examples on a tagging line, for example, here. So we have the reference tags, for example, here. Then we have the LBL tag as shown in my example before. And the second one is here a real world example how it could look like. And sometimes we have only one example put into the file. Sometimes we have more than one example. For example, if something can be differently handled in several cases, real world cases, for example. So that was my first one. And the second one, just jump back so you can see better what's on my slide. Second one is I just put a heading in my document, but for technical issues, I couldn't use real text. So what I did is I placed just a simple pixel-based file in my document, a picture, but I like to want to be it handled like a real word heading because it wouldn't be appropriate to only say, hey, here comes a picture and we have some kind of alternate text. So the intention of the author should be translated into our tagging structure. And in this case, we need to say something about the semantics about the heading. In my case, for example, could be a H1 or H2 or whatever. And the second one is we need to transform the information in a world that we can read the text as text. And in this case, just jump back to my web example. We have a possibility to do it the right way. So I marked it as an H1, for example, and it's not marked as a so-called alternate text. It's so-called actual text. So we have three ways in PDF to give some kind of alternate description for figures. And one is the actual text, and we put it here. So a screen reader, for example, could pronounce the heading the right way and can tell me, okay, that's the main heading. And this issue is addressed too in the tagging guide. So we have one section about all the tags, everything you need to know about the things. And the second one is about all the attributes. And then you can find, for example, several things about language, alternate, and so on. And if you're interested, for example, in actual text with some kind of code example too, you will find it here inside this guide. All right, I jump back to my presentation once again. And I come to the next real world example where we divided the answer in not the one and only correct way to handle it. We took a PDF and said, okay, what could be inside and what issues could be inside. And one thing that quite often happens, you have a document title. Mostly on the first page, we have some kind of title. I placed here, for example, something from the PDF specification itself. So we have a title for the document. And the question is how to tag that kind of content. The best appropriate way would be to use a title tag. But there is no title tag defined in the PDF specification. So we can't use it in PDFUA or whatever because it's not defined in PDF. So one solution in the real world is to use the H1 tag for that kind of document title. And the other solution existing out in the world is to use a P tag. So both are valid and usable with its advantages and disadvantages. And in that kind of case we have here, for example, we give a provision that you can do both ways. The normal one most people use at the moment, I think, is using the H1. You said, yeah, that's okay, please use it. But to have a good information structure in the document, please avoid to have another H1 in the whole document. The next heading, for example, chapter 1 in the PDF specification, should be an H2 to have a straightforward possible tagging structure in your document. The other possibility would be use a P tag. Then it's quite easy for people with using ATs, for example, to jump to the next heading using their shortcuts or whatever they like to. So we come to the point that we say use H1, but then avoid please to do it once again in the whole document. The best way from our side is use a title tag, map it to P, and then you have a document that you could even use with PDF 2.0, because in PDF 2.0 there is a title tag. Then you can just simply map it to the correct one, or just remove role mapping, for example, and then you have a valid file without any issues. If you use H1 and map H1 to title, then you have the issue that there's no H1 anymore in your document. So that's only a possible way to deal with it. We said in best cases use a title tag, map it to P, and avoid H1. But you can use H1, of course, but then just be aware of the things that might happen in the future. Some input for you if you like to have more information about the whole tagging thing in relation to Matterhorn, in relation to the tag guide. We have published last year a reference suite, a new version of the old one. So we have a version 1.0, and we updated it to 1.1 and changed the reference files in two ways. We made them, everything that's inside is tag PDF practice guide related. So it's everything fine here. If you need to have code examples, for example, just take a look inside. And the second one is we took more real world examples. We have, for example, an OCR document inside. We have a presentation. We have a longer document. We have a chapter of a book, and so on and so on. So if you have to like a look inside some real world documents, you can use this one here. The second one I can give you as an interesting point. We have a liaison working group inside the PDF accessibility. It's about updates in the WCAG PDF techniques. And at the moment, there are a lot of documents, PDF documents in development, giving atomic examples for all the things that could be inside the document. There are examples, for example, for just a document with a paragraph, single paragraph, but we have, for example, different one with a paragraph that's divided on 2 pages, and so on. So if you like to have some knowledge about it, it's you can just get in touch with the group. You can work inside the group. As it is a liaison group, you don't need to be a member of the PDF association. A little bit about the future development. As several people before me told, we have PDFUA 2 in development. So it's not the easiest one, as I find, because there are many issues. We need to address several things that couldn't be done with PDF 1.7, but that can be done with PDF 2.0. We need to be aware of all the real world documents. And every time we think, oh, we are ready with this kind of stuff, we have a next real world example, and we need to make it really proof that everything fits into the specifications. With PDF 2.0, we have several new tags. I mentioned, for example, the title tag, but several other issues will be addressed too. For example, at the moment with PDF 1.7, it's quite hard to have a caption with a figure. There is no mechanism to combine them both. This is changed in PDF 2.0. It's still work in progress, but it's strongly forced by the PDFUA TWG, because we are in association with the ISO working group. And I think next week we will have our next meeting, and we hope to get all the things done. I hope it will be quite soon. All right, I'm done with my slides and examples, and I'm quite open for any questions.
Great, thank you so much, Klaas. You can download Klaas's slides from today's presentation from the handouts panel. And we're now going to start answering some of your questions. So let's see here. First question, I did a check with Acrobat's accessibility checker. It gives errors and warnings for the tagged best practice guide, but the file claims to be compliant, isn't it?
Oh yes, if you take a look on our website, you can find everything of the resources. I just jumped to the one for the, where is it, the tech practice guys, and you some information too. And if you download it, we claim it to be compatible to PDFUA 1 and to the best practice guide itself, of course. And the accessibility checker inside of Acrobat claims to be checking by WCAG, but not by PDFUA. That's one of the first things. And the second one is that, for example, the usage of the LBL tag is handled different on the side of Acrobat, sometimes several other tools too. And what we in our syntax guide offer to be the main best case usage. So yes, the file is compatible, but the usage of the tool inside Acrobat might give some kind of warnings or errors, but the file itself, it is a valid PDF UA file.
Mm-hmm. For a title tag, what would JAWS and NVDA announce to a non-sighted user?
It differs how the title tag is announced. For example, if you just tag it as title, so bracket, title, bracket, and you don't role map it, it wouldn't be a valid PDF file itself because you use a tag that's not allowed by the specification. And if you map it to, for example, P, it wouldn't be just read out loud as a normal paragraph. But that's not the real point of matter, because normally if you start JAWS and you open your PDF file, the first thing that's read out loud is the title shown at the top of Acrobat. So in my case here, for example, I'm in my slides, it's accessible PDF, how to tag content the right way. And most often that's the same text as you have it on your first page. So it's not a big deal because you're more interested to navigate to relevant points inside your document. And therefore, it's much more interesting to find the H1s in your document. And it's not really helpful to say, please jump to our next headline. You only find the title itself, which you heard before. So yes, if it's P, it's only spelled out loud as a normal paragraph. If it's H1, you get it as you will ever be, for example, defined your setting in JAWS, but mostly it will tell you heading number 1, and then it tells you the title of the document.
Okay. A question regarding the tagged PDF best practice guide. When putting a paragraph element inside a footnote or a note element, the PDF accessibility checker pack usually produces a warning about incorrect use. Is this
Yeah.
related to their roles as block and inline elements, and how can it be avoided?
The question was a little bit asked by Boris before on the session. So is there one checker on a world which is fine with everything that's in real world example? And if you take a look inside the specification, sometimes there are more possibilities how to read it. So the developers of the pack, they give out a warning. It's not an error, it's a warning. They say, no, it shouldn't be used inside. We have a note itself, it's clearly it should be text, and we are done with it, just putting content inside the note tag. But possibly you can have different content inside your footnote. Even a picture is not forbidden. And if you can't use, for example, different subtags inside the node, like P, list elements, whatever, it might be not semantically appropriate. So it's fully okay. And for example, JAWS or NVDA read out loud the correct way if you put a P tag inside your footnote or not. But I'm not, how could I say, I'm aware that is a problem on the pack side, and I don't like that warning. There should be more kind of explanation to give a user feedback why it couldn't be okay sometimes. But from the point of view from the Matterhorn point, from the PDF's point, it's fine. And if you take a look inside the tag PDF best practice guide, the advice here is use a P tag, for example, inside the note. And we are aware that tag is giving a warning.
Okay. When should a figure tag be placed within the hierarchies? Should it be contained within a block level tag, such as a paragraph? A trick question, I think.
Tricky question, a good one. It differs. For example, we had a pack here, for example, PDF accessibility checker. You always get a warning if you place a figure inside the P tag. And the question is, in this case, okay, what is this figure about? If you have just a plain figure and you just have, for example, a tree on a figure and you have text before and text after, there is no need to put it in some kind of, for example, a P tag, because the picture is not part of a paragraph. It's just a picture. But that's a semantic question, of course. From the syntax point, you can put a figure tag just in a tag tree, or you can put it inside the P. It's not really different or wrong or whatever, but there are good reasons to have, for example, a figure inside a longer paragraph. For example, if you have a small icon or something like that, and there is no Unicode, for example, no Unicode value for it, you need to place it inside a paragraph and put an actual text or alt text on it. So in that kind of example, for example, you need to have it inside the P paragraph and you need to define, for example, an alternate text. But for normal pictures, I would avoid to put it inside a P, for example, or an H1, which is worse.
Okay. The example with I'm a heading, does it conform to WCAG 1.4.5 text, which is text is used to convey information rather than images of text? There is real text with actual text for screen reader users, but when you see the document or search the document or have a visual impairment and use the PDF in one column, don't you still have the images instead of text for non-screen reader users?
Yeah, we have the problem that HTML is in this area a little bit different to PDF. For example, in HTML, you have alternate text. You can put it, but there's no actual text, for example. And in this case, I think PDF is more precise on the handling. If you and how it is presented to the user, it differs from the technique you use. If you, for example, use, let's say, Acrobat, as I'm in the document now, and you're going on a page where it is presented and you have low vision, for example, and use a screen magnifier, the screen magnifier will zoom into your heading, even if it's a picture. But it will pronounce, if you read out loud, what it's written. My example, I can just briefly go to my example here. I think it's not okay with the contrast, for example, so it's not WCAG compliant at all, but it looks like a text. And the only reason we can't give it as a text inside my PDF is a technical issue. And there are more technical issues. PDFUA, for example, has several other things inside. So in this kind, PDF is more precise and does a better job in handling. And if you have, for example, an AT like the web reader or something like that, there are other ways to handle that content. But the PDF itself, the tag PDF best practice guide, they all give only the technical possibilities, what you can do with the content inside your PDF document. The viewer and the AT can do whatever they like to. We only give a file, and that depends on how the developer of the AT, for example, decides what do I like to do with the content that's provided to me by the PDF file.
Okay. Next question. Let's see. Which tag should I use for headings that occur in tables or in lists? Since, and the questioner asks, I cannot use a heading tag, can I? But
That's here we are in the area. Some things are not strictly forbidden by the PDF standard itself. That changes with PDF 2.0, but at the moment, several things are not forbidden. But we are aware that several things are not strictly recommended by any of these guidelines. For example, headings in tables, most often, most tables, I only know few examples, most tables will not need headings. You just work with table heads and header IDs maybe to have a correct corresponding relation between all the content inside. Yeah, that's mostly the best way to deal with it and not with headings. And ATs often have problems with heading inside tables. Which tables with lists is a little bit problematic because where do you like to place your heading? Should it be inside the L tag or shouldn't be before or after? And then it depends what the content should reflect like. We only talk about here about the syntax. So if you like to know an answer, just jump into the best practice guide. Go, for example, for the heading section, for the list section, for whatever, and take a look inside. Most appropriate is the use of the caption tag for lists. If you have, for example, a longer list and want to say what's inside the list, you can use a caption tag for lists. But in a real world, I'll need to say AT does not really good support this kind of stuff.
Okay. So a higher level question here. What's the overall purpose of using tag elements that have no apparent semantic value to assistive technology without role mapping to achieve that semantic meaning? So I guess that's a follow-up question, by the way, on the question about the title tag.
Yeah, the title tag. So title tag, you could, for example, implement if you have, for example, you're developing an AT, you could implement, for example, I can show it in Acrobat. Acrobat added this one years ago, I think. We have several normal tags here, but that's only because I showed in a role mapped way. So if I switch off the role map may, I get my original one. So my title is correctly marked as title and I map it to P. So an AT developer could build up a software maybe with a view to PDF 2.0 and say, okay, if we have a tag called title, I put in a special visualization, a special reading out loud function, whatever. Doesn't matter if it's mapped or not. One possibility. The second one is if you now build up, for example, a document template and you like to use it for years and years. And you know you are aware PDF 2.0, it's 2 years old or more than 2 years old, and it will come to my software too in 1 year or 2. And I like to build up my template now as it works in 10 years. Then this would be a good way because you have the possibility to have an easy switch from the document now, PDF 1.7 with role mapping, to the next level document, title usage without role mapping. And we are done with quite less work than rebuilding all the content structure.
Okay, great. Okay, one more question here I think we have time for. In an existing PDF document, is there a way to manually tag a hyphen correctly?
What is correct? So same thing here. You can jump inside the tag PDF practice guide. We talk about it. Most software's usage is to put a span on a hyphen and use the actual text. So read it out as actual as text and make this one empty. That's most often used, I think. But that's not the only way it could work. There are other ways. And here's a difference between PDF 2.0 and 2.7.2 because artifact, which is the correct one, is not a tag in PDF 1.7, but it is a tag in PDF 2.0.